The wall went up one stone at a time, with no one asking for it and no one helping. A boy named Cody Marsh was 11 years old that first summer, and every morning before the heat settled into the hollow, he was out on the lower slope of his family's 6-acre field, pulling fieldstone from the shallow soil and stacking it in a low, deliberate line that ran almost along the natural curve of the hill. He was not fast. He moved in the unhurried way of someone who has already decided the work is right and does not need to prove it by rushing. He squatted beside each stone, turned it in both hands, set it against the last one with a patience that most grown men in Newton County, Arkansas, did not bother to practice even in their best moments. The stones were not large. Most were the size of a loaf of bread or smaller. The gray chert and tan sandstone that kept working up through the thin topsoil every season. The kind of rocks that Ozark farmers had been cursing and heaving out of their fields for 150 years. Cody was not heaving them anywhere. He carried each one a short distance and set it where it needed to go. By the end of July, the line stretched about 40 feet across the face of the slope. Nobody on the road asked him what he was building. They already knew. He was the Marsh boy, the one who had repeated second grade, the one who sat at the back of the church and stared at the floor during the sermon, the one whose teachers had used the word slow in parent conferences so many times it had become a kind of shorthand for the whole family, in the way that shortcuts do when people stop looking carefully. What they did not know was that Cody Marsh was not confused. He read slowly, and he did not like to talk, and when people assumed, that meant he did not understand what was happening around him. He found it easiest to let them keep assuming. He had learned early that explaining himself cost more than it returned. The wall was going to save the field. He had not told anyone that yet. He was not sure he needed to. Stay with this story. If you are new here, this channel is about the kind of knowledge that does not come with a credential, and the kind of people who get written off before they are ever really listened to. Hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. This one has been traveling, and we want to know where it lands. Newton County sits deep in the Boston Mountains, the roughest and most isolated stretch of the Ozarks. The Buffalo River cuts through its limestone hollows a few miles to the north, running cold and clear over gravel bars that have been there since before anyone was counting. The land between the ridges is steep, rocky, and given to sudden behavior during hard rain. The soil profile here is thin, sitting above a shelf of chert and fractured sandstone that does not absorb water the way flat ground does. What comes down from the sky on a hard April afternoon does not have many places to go. It moves. Farming in Newton County has never been a matter of good fortune and a plow. The families who worked this land in the late 1800s and into the early 20th century understood something specific about how water and soil relate on a hill, and many of them built accordingly. Low rock walls. Not fences, not foundations, just courses of stacked fieldstone that followed the elevation lines of the slope, the way a surveyor follows a contour. Old-timers call them rock rows in some parts of the county, or sometimes just the walls. They did not always explain the purpose. They just built them when they had time and kept farming. By the time Cody's generation came along, most of those walls were gone, pushed over by machinery, swallowed by brush, forgotten when the families who built them stopped farming and moved on. The knowledge went with them. What was left in a lot of cases was the thin soil and the erosion and the puzzlement of people who could not figure out why the old fields had done better. Cody's family had worked the same 6 acres for 4 generations. His great-grandfather, a man named Ernest Marsh, had farmed this slope from about 1912 until the late 30s, and when he died, he left behind a wooden box of small things, old receipts and faded ink, a broken pocket watch with the glass missing, a few folded newspaper clippings that had gone soft and brown at the creases. And at the very bottom of the box, a photograph of the lower field taken sometime around 1928. It was a simple image, the kind of documentary photograph that farm families sometimes made in that era, capturing the place the way it looked in a good year. In the photograph you could see, if you looked carefully, the faint lines of stacked stone running along the slope in parallel courses, following the natural contour of the hill. Someone had written on the back of the photograph in pencil, in handwriting that had gone small with age, a single sentence. It says, "Keeps the water in the ground." Cody found the photograph when he was 9 years old. He was going through the box because he liked old things, the way some children are drawn to the physical past without being able to explain why. He sat on the floor of the spare room for a long time with the photograph in both hands, looking at the slope behind his family's house, looking at the lines of stone, reading the sentence on the back. Then he put the photograph back in the box and put the box back on the shelf. 2 years later, he went out to the lower field and started stacking. His father, Dale Marsh, worked a second job 3 days a week at a hardware supplier in Jasper, 40 minutes down the mountain, and he came home in the evenings tired and not in the mood for puzzles. He noticed the wall going up on the lower slope about 2 weeks in, walked out one afternoon, and stood looking at it with his hands in his pockets and his hat pushed back on his head. Dale told him the field needed to be cleared for planting, not filled up with rock. Cody was setting a stone into place along the line. He did not stop. Dale asked if he was listening. Cody answered yes, sir, without looking up. Dale asked again what the boy thought he was doing out there. Cody did not answer that directly. He turned a stone over in his hands, found the flat face, and set it down. Dale stood for another minute and looked at the wall and at his son, and then walked back to the house. He did not tell Cody to stop. He did not tell him to keep going. He let it sit the way you let a child sit with something, waiting for it to run its course. Their neighbor across the next ridge, a broad man named Gary Peel, who farmed 40 acres and measured most things by what they would produce in the fall, noticed the wall from his truck one morning in August and stopped at the gate. He called out to Cody and asked what the boy was building. Cody told him he was stacking rock. Gary looked at the wall, looked at Cody, decided everybody needed a project, and drove on. That evening he told his wife about it. She thought it sounded harmless. At school that fall, a boy named Marcus Deaton heard about the wall from his older brother, who had heard about it from Gary Peel's son. And Marcus announced at the lunch table that Cody Marsh had spent the whole summer carrying rocks around his field like a little kid playing house. Marcus was not particularly cruel. He was just comfortable with easy conclusions, and easy conclusions about Cody Marsh had been in supply for years. The table laughed, and Cody ate his sandwich and did not say anything. A woman named Ruth Pearson ran the Newton County Farm Extension desk out of a narrow office in Jasper, and she heard about the wall secondhand from Dale at the hardware counter one afternoon. She mentioned it to a colleague, and they agreed it sounded like a nice activity for a boy who needed something to focus on. She did not drive out to look at it. Nobody thought it was any more than that, and so Cody kept building. Here is what it was. When rain falls on a sloped field at a high intensity, the water does not sink straight down into the soil. It moves. It follows gravity along the surface, and as it picks up speed, it picks up material. Fine topsoil, the thin layer that holds the organic matter, the exchangeable nutrients, the bacterial networks that make crops possible, lifts from the surface and travels with the water downhill. This process is called erosion by surface runoff, and on an unprotected slope, it is not a dramatic event. It is a quiet, accumulating subtraction. Each rain removes a fraction of the topsoil, and the fraction is never replaced at the same rate by natural processes, so the field slowly loses its capacity. A contour wall changes the hydraulics of the slope. A low stone wall built along the natural elevation line, meaning it runs perpendicular to the direction water flows rather than parallel to it, does not stop the water completely. What it does is interrupt the energy of the flow. Water running downhill hits the wall and decelerates. When velocity drops, the soil particles the water was carrying drop out of suspension and settle behind the wall. The water then spreads laterally along the face of the wall, which further reduces its energy. By the time it seeps through the gaps in the stone or overtops the wall, it is moving slowly enough to infiltrate the soil on the downslope side, rather than cutting a channel through it. Over years, the ground behind a contour wall accumulates the eroded material that would otherwise have left the field entirely. The soil profile there becomes measurably deeper and more fertile than the exposed slope above it. The wall is not holding water back like a dam. It is slowing water down long enough for the ground to accept it. That is the whole mechanism. Farmers in the terraced hills of Yemen built on this principle. Farmers in the pre-Columbian Andes built on this principle. Farmers in the Ozarks built on it too, before the knowledge was set aside, and the land has been paying for the forgetting ever since. Ernest Marsh put it in one sentence on the back of a photograph. Keeps the water in the ground. He did not elaborate because he did not think he needed to. The walls were standing right there in the picture. Cody built 3 walls that first summer, spacing them about 15 feet apart vertically up the slope, each one following the contour line he could read by watching where water moved after a light rain. He had no surveying instrument. He had the photograph, his eyes, and 2 summers of watching the field after weather came through. The walls were not precision work. Stones jutted at angles. Gaps remained between courses. The whole thing looked informal and slightly improvised from the road. Gary Peel drove past them in early October and remarked to nobody in particular that it looked like something fell over. Dale Marsh said nothing more about the walls after that first conversation. He had other things to think about. The following spring, Newton County received more than twice its average April rainfall over the course of 3 weeks, arriving in 4 separate hard events. Each one came through fast and heavy, 2 to 3 inches in an afternoon. The kind of rain that makes farmers stop what they are doing and watch the sky, and then watch the fields. The county road crew spent that month filling washouts. A small creek behind Peel's farm jumped its bank during the 3rd event and stripped a visible layer of red topsoil from about a quarter of his lower cornfield, carrying it down through the fence line and into the hollow. 2 other farms along the ridge road lost topsoil from their open slopes in amounts you could see from the road. Channels cut by fast water with nothing in its way. The marsh field looked different when the rain stopped. It was not a dramatic difference in the way that people expect reversals to look. There was no obvious greening, no sudden abundance. What was there was the difference between soil that had held and soil that had moved. The ground behind each of Cody's 3 walls was visibly darker and slightly raised relative to the surface upslope, which meant water had slowed there long enough to sink in and to deposit what it was carrying. The walls themselves had caught debris, leaves and small stones and silt, on their uphill face. The channels that had formed on either side of the field, where the land had no walls, showed the same red erosion lines as every slope in the county. But the field between the walls had kept its surface intact. Dale Marsh walked the field the morning after the last hard rain stopped. He walked slowly along the first wall, looking at the soil behind it. He walked the second wall. He walked the third. He stood at the bottom of the field for a while, looking at the whole slope. Then he walked back to the house. Cody was eating breakfast when Dale came in. Dale told him the walls had held. Cody answered, "Yes, sir," and kept eating. Dale wanted to know how the boy had known to build them. Cody thought about how to answer that. Then he told his father that great-grandpa had written it down. Dale did not say anything more for a moment. He poured his coffee and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the lower field in the morning light, at the 3 irregular lines of stacked stone running across the face of the slope. The quiet in the kitchen was the kind that comes when someone is rearranging what they thought they knew. Gary Peel did not come over to look at the marsh field. He spent that week pricing topsoil amendments and trying to determine whether replanting the lower section of his cornfield was going to be worth the cost that season. Marcus Deaton was in 8th grade by then and had other things on his mind. Ruth Pearson wrote a summary of spring flood damage across the county for the Extension office and mentioned lost topsoil on 4 farms by name. The marsh property was not one of them, because nobody had told her to look at it. The walls are still on that slope. Cody added to them the following summer, and the summer after that, extending the lines, tightening gaps, working a 4th course up the higher part of the field where the grade was steeper, and the water had more speed by the time it reached the lower section. The field has not shed topsoil in the visible way that the neighboring farms have continued to absorb as a routine cost of farming on a slope without protection. There is no official record of the walls, no county extension report, no award. They are just stones, stacked by a quiet boy who read a sentence in pencil on the back of a photograph and decided that one sentence was enough to act on. Whether Ernest Marsh, if he could have seen that field after April, would have said yes, that is what I meant. You got it right, is a question that belongs to no one now. Tell us in the comments if you have ever seen old work like this. A wall, a ditch, a planting pattern, something your grandparents did that nobody bothered to explain, and only later did you understand what it was for. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. These stories keep coming.